This video is sponsored by Magellan TV. During the summer of 1944, Germany urgently needed a solution to fight off the constant Allied bombing wrecking its cities, or at least a temporary one. With insufficient fighter power available to take out the bombers before they struck, the Luftwaffe plotted to develop a piloted rocket interceptor. The Bachem Ba 349 was a risky and low-cost concept. The interceptor would launch in a vertical position, and the pilot would guide it straight into the enemy's bombers. Then the pilot would eject, while the rest of the interceptor crashed into the ground. The aircraft was so unsafe that it's often been dubbed a German kamikaze. Furthermore, the plane was built in meager factories by unskilled workers, with nothing more than wood, nails, and glue. The Natter never joined the war, which ended before it could be fully developed. However, the remaining prototypes are exhibited as a reminder of German engineers' recklessness and desperation during the final days of World War II. The Bachem Ba 349 was a wild last-ditch attempt by a dying regime trying to stave off the inevitable. The Allies were coming, and they would only accept complete capitulation. Learn more about these final days in the Magellan TV documentary Unconditional Surrender, featuring interviews with the men who experienced the triumphs and tragedies of World War II. Magellan TV is a new type of documentary streaming membership created by filmmakers that brings over 3,000 documentaries to all of your devices. Visit try.magellantv.com/darkskies or click the link in the description below to get a free 1-month trial. Explore the Magellan TV series The Price of Empire that brings you eyewitness accounts of the individuals who paid dearly in the greatest military conflict the world has ever seen. Support Dark Skies and check out Magellan TV with a 1-month free trial. Click on the link in the description below or visit try.magellantv.com/darkskies today. Emergency Fighter Program. During World War II, there were limited options for countries to truly defend against aerial bombing formations. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, an experimental German rocket-powered fighter, had been in production since 1937, but output couldn't be scaled up fast enough. Guidance systems were also still unreliable, and there was much work to be done before surface-to-air missile defenses emerged as viable weapons. Germany was under particular stress from the lack of an effective system to defend its cities against the constant bombing from the Allies. In 1943, the Luftwaffe concluded that the best solution was to provide their missiles with a pilot that could operate them during the terminal approach phase. And so the Jägernotprogramm, or Emergency Fighter Program, was born. The Luftwaffe called German companies for designs of a simple interceptor that could be built from everyday materials. The use of strategic materials like aluminum and steel was off the table. Instead, workers would only have wood, glue, and nails available. The Reich also required the interceptor to be built by unskilled workers in underground factories. At first, the plan was to launch the aircraft vertically, but later the design called for a horizontal takeoff from a tricycle-wheeled trolley. Junkers, Henkel, Bachem, and Messerschmitt submitted their proposals. The preferred design was the Henkel P-1077 Julia, a single-seat interceptor in which the pilot sat in a prone position, with his chest flat down and his back facing up. However, the prototype was destroyed during an Allied raid over Vienna in December 1944. The backup selection was the Bachem Ba 349, a similar human-guided missile that provided a quick and dirty solution to counter the devastating Allied bombings. Rocket-powered Snake. In early 1940, the German aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun first imagined a rocket interceptor that could be launched vertically and attack its enemies before gliding back to land. He pitched the idea twice to the Luftwaffe's Ministry of Aviation, but was rebuffed both times. The ministry's reviewers found that the concept was unnecessary and unworkable. However, the concept reached the ears of German engineer Erich Bachem, technical director of the Gerhard Fiesler Werk Company. Bachem started to work on a rocket-launched fighter that could reach high altitudes faster than other fighters. The project, dubbed Fiesler Fi-166, was to be launched by liquid fuel rockets in a vertical position until it reached 12,000 feet. Powered by 2 Umo 004 jet engines, it would engage with Allied bombers before gliding back to base. This concept never evolved into a prototype. But Bachem had a second chance to develop the concept in 1944. By then, the engineer had created his own company, the Bachem Werke GmbH, which supplied spare parts for fighter aircraft manufacturers. Inspired by the Fi-166, Bachem presented a design that was considered to be more radical than others submitted. The BP-20, as it was originally dubbed, was made of wooden panels glued together. The cockpit was built with a bulletproof glass windshield, and the wings were simple lacquered wooden panels. Several other features made this an inexpensive design. For example, all the control surfaces were located in the tail, and it had no landing gear. This rocket interceptor could be constructed by former furniture workers in bare and hidden factories. The staff of the Air Ministry's technical division initially laughed off his idea. However, Bachem was well connected and managed to present his proposal to the head of the SS himself, Heinrich Himmler. 150 BP-20s were ordered by Himmler, who loved the concept and forced the Luftwaffe's Ministry of Aviation to order another 50. Michael Neufeld, a senior curator at the National Air and Space Museum, explained such a radical decision to the Air and Space magazine, saying, quote, "The SS under Himmler's leadership felt that it was the true representative of National Socialism. They believed they were really the organization that was going to save Germany from disaster and began funding a lot of strange projects." Bachem dubbed this prototype Natter, German for snake. This rocket would be launched in a vertical position from a scaffold frame. The launch would be powered by a Walter engine, the same used on the Me-163 Comet interceptor aircraft. But the engine alone wasn't powerful enough to launch the rocket, which required 4 additional fuel boosters that provided 10,600 pounds of thrust during the 10-second launch phase. After launch, the boosters would extinguish and be discarded. It was expected that the Natter would reach an altitude of 20,000 to 30,000 feet. The pilot aboard would then operate the interceptor until it got close to an Allied bomber formation. At that point, it would fire 19 to 28 missiles from a rocket pod located on the nose of the fuselage. After firing the armament, the pilot would release the nose section and escape on a parachute. The cockpit would descend on a different parachute. Once the bombers were destroyed and the pilot escaped safely, the low-cost interceptor would crash into the ground. Bachem focused on the importance of pilot safety and rejected the idea of giving the Natter a concrete nose to be used to crash into a bomber. Despite the efforts to keep the pilot safe, the interceptor is often called the German Kamikaze thanks to its poor safety record. Snake in flames. The Natter was developed at the Waldsee factory at the Waffen-SS under the close supervision of the SS and engineer Hans Kammler. The first prototype, dubbed Versuchsmuster 1, was finished on October 4, 1944. To test if the prototype could glide after reaching an altitude of 3,000 meters, it was strapped to a Hinkel HE-111 bomber and towed to the desired height. Pilot Erich Kluckner was aboard the interceptor in the first 4 towed flights. However, it still wasn't clear if the Natter had suitable flying characteristics. To clear all doubt, pilot Hans Zubert attempted a free-flight glide test. He concluded that the interceptor was, quote, "indeed a very good flying machine." Unmanned launch tests, however, were a disaster. On its first vertical launch, the interceptor got stuck in the launch tower. Since it was made of wood, the Natter burnt quickly. Over the course of 3 months, the interceptor kept flying off course, crashing and burning. By the end of February 1945, the Berlin authorities pressured Bachem to conduct a manned launch test flight. Demands increased after the company finally managed to perform an entire mission sequence with a dummy pilot. Bachem wasn't genuinely ready, but decided to strap a human to the cockpit and carry on with the launch of the M23 prototype anyway. Lothar Sieber, a native of Dresden, was designated for the test flight after the original pilot hurt his back. A few years prior, Sieber had been demoted to corporal after being caught drinking on duty. To recover his rank, he conducted risky secret missions on the Eastern Front, for which he was granted an Iron Cross. A day before the test, Sieber had dinner with some friends and told them he was confident about the mission. Just in case, he also wrote a will in which he left all of his possessions to his fiancée. On the day of the test, Sieber and the development team had to wait until the fog cleared out, but some low-hanging clouds remained. Development Chief Willy Fiedler explained to the pilot the launch sequence. He warned, quote, "If the machine tries to turn upside down after liftoff, do a half-roll maneuver. Then you would be in a steep climb and would be better able to orient yourself." Sieber and Erich Bachem shook hands, and before departing, the pilot turned to comfort the engineer by saying, quote, "Let me worry about this. I look upon the testing of this device as a self-imposed task that I would like to accomplish, and I firmly believe in the successful outcome." The M23 launched successfully in a vertical position, and its 4 boosters detached as planned. But at 350 feet, the canopy detached. Some believe that the cockpit was filled with fumes from the combustion chamber. The Bachem team saw the M23 fall in a vertical position into the ground. Even as the group stood miles away from the crash, they could hear the impact sound. After the accident, Sieber was posthumously promoted to his old rank. Example of irresponsibility. Only 2 months after Sieber's funeral, Germany surrendered. The interceptor never got to fulfill its purpose. Out of the 200 ordered, only 36 Natters were ever built. 3 human-crewed test flights were carried out after the fatal accident of the M23. By then, the interceptor was considered acceptably reliable and was ready for operational evaluation. However, few unpiloted tests were done after that, since the cement blocks required to ground the missiles during test flights were scarce. Afraid that the Allied troops could capture some of the Natters, Bachem employees destroyed 6 of them. Yet in May 1945, U.S. soldiers got their hands on 4 of them and on the development documentation. The U.S. Air Force gave one Natter to the Smithsonian Institution, where it's currently stored, awaiting restoration. Another one was given to the Deutsches Museum in Munich, where it will be displayed in a rocket-powered ascent simulation. Andreas Hempfer, a historian of the museum, said, quote, "I want the Natter to be a symbol for the irresponsible willingness of German engineers and elites in the last months of the war to build weapons that only seemed to be superior, but were primitive in many respects and based on half-baked ideas."